does sustainability mean in growth-dependent Asia? Is Asia facing reality about resources and the environment? What are the biggest obstacles to a sustainable Asia? How can these challenges become business opportunities? Introducing Professor Liu Minggang, Distinguished Fellow of Fung Global Institute.
Can we start? So we have empty tables. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And we are very pleased to have our panel members, very distinguished members here, to talk about what matters most to a sustainable Asia. And please allow me at first to introduce them one by one. And Professor C.B. Bhattacharya, and he is the Dean of the International Relations and the chairperson in the corporate responsibility at ESMT. ESMT stands for European School of Management and Technology in Berlin, Germany. He is an international expert in business strategy formation and innovation, aimed at increasing both business value and social value. And he has received several research and teaching awards, and was twice named by Business Week's Outstanding Faculty list. Professor Bhattacharya is the founder of ESMT's Sustainable Business Roundtable. He received his PhD in marketing from the Wharton School in 1993, and his MBA from India Institute of Management in 1984. And we will have Mr. Lu Mai, and he is now the Executive Director of China Public Finance Society. He has been Secretary General of China Development Research Foundation since 1998. Under his leadership, CDRF has carried out various important events, including the forum most of us have participated in. That is the forum in Diaoyutai in Beijing, okay? All these activities, Mr. Lu have got great contributions to all this. And he has also extensive experience in Chinese rural reform. As far back as 80s, he was director of experimental area office of rural reform, and it's a research center for the rural development of the State Council. He received a master's degree of the K School from Harvard. Now, please let me ask each of you to brief the most significant issues for a sustainable Asia at first, and explain a little bit why. Let's start with Professor Bhattacharya. Would you like to say a few words at the podium?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Liu, for the very, very kind introduction. For those of you who have studied the program in detail, I am not Isher Ahluwalia. It's the first observation to make. It's very clear. And thank you to Victor and Andrew for the kind invitation, and to Andrew for the shout out in less than 24 hours yesterday that I should take the podium today. I have been preparing for this big moment all my life. Let me tell you that I really am not an India expert per se. My work is in the area of sustainability and corporate responsibility, and what I try to do is I try to research conditions under which the business case for sustainability can be made, so as to encourage businesses to invest more in sustainability initiatives and reap rewards from that. Very recently, I published a book which is called Leveraging Corporate Responsibility, and this actually illuminates the conditions under which companies can derive benefits from investments in these areas. And it would have been lovely to gift all of you a copy of this book, but that would have been kind of out of the ordinary and way too expensive for me. So I did the next best thing. I brought a flyer of the book for each of you so that you can help yourself to the flyer and perhaps buy the book later on and support my research. Chairman Liu asked us to comment briefly on the most significant developments in sustainability. And the way I look at it, the definition of sustainability by the Brundtland Commission is that we should be leaving the world in a place, in a way that the future generations can enjoy what our world has to offer, what our Earth has to offer. And what this means in simple terms is the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. And what I want to do is I want to articulate a few significant challenges that I see in the quest for sustainable development in Asia, with particular emphasis on India. After all, that is the country I was born and brought up in. The most significant challenge I see is that of education. India has made great strides in education, so 75% of its population are now considered literate. And the school enrollment between the ages of 6 and 14 has actually gone up to 90%, which is quite impressive. At the same time, however, what is lacking in that education is quality. So the pedagogies are hugely outdated, the learning styles are hugely outdated, and as a result, India is now struggling to catch up with what's called, or to reap, the demographic dividend, which has been much touted about. Interestingly, the dropout rate is very, very high, and only 28% of the students make it to grades 11 and 12. So you can imagine how much, if 90% are going in at the 6 to 14 age, but 28% are continuing on to the 11 and 12, and obviously that's out of necessity or perhaps lack of facilities. So we really need to do something in that area. The second area I want to touch on is that of inclusive growth, which has been talked about quite a bit, but I do believe that this is a significant challenge. Now, you all know that India developed at a rate of about 5% between 1990 to 2009, give or take. However, the flip side of that is that the folks who live on $1.25 a day or less, the proportion of those have fallen only by 1% per year during each of these years, which is actually a statistic that stands out amongst emerging countries, and it's not at all impressive as far as other emerging countries are concerned. 2/3 of the Indian population today lack access to sanitation. 2/3 of the population lack access to sanitation. And this is an interesting factoid that the penetration of mobile phones in India far outstrips the penetration of sanitary toilets in India. And you can say that, yes, mobile phones are a good thing, but I would contend that toilets are probably more important to basic development. And to link it back to the schools, in a study of 200 government schools, it was found that 59% of those schools had no drinking water, and 89% of the schools had no toilet. So how is it that we expect kids to learn in such oppressed conditions? So I would say that that's a significant challenge. And particularly, again, with more than 50% of India kind of relying on agriculture to grow and develop, how India manages its local roots will clearly have a big say in how this development goes. Let me touch on one planetary challenge. So those were two challenges related to people, which I think are significant. Planetary challenges are plenty as well. So today, India, on average, emits 1.4 tons of CO2 per capita, okay, which is very impressive compared to 17 in the US and close to 7 in China. But considering India's population, if you multiply that per capita by the population, India turns out to be the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world after the US and China. So clearly there is a huge task ahead in kind of keeping that level and also educating people in sustainable ways of living and environmentally friendly ways of living. Coming to air quality, I mean, it's interesting that 90% of rural India still uses primitive ways of cooking using cow dung and firewood and so on, which of course are very, very bad for the environment. And 30% of the urban population does the same thing. Perhaps not surprisingly, in a study of about 132 countries that was conducted by the Environmental Performance Index, India ranked the last out of these 132 countries in air quality. So clearly, again, a lot needs to be done on that front of sustainable ways of cooking and improved methods. Deforestation is a huge challenge. So Indians love furniture and ways of living with wood. So India is a large importer of wood. India is a large importer of palm oil. So India is importing palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia, which are its Asian countries, and palm oil leads to significant deforestation. So there are a slew of environmental challenges in front of us as well. And then coming to business, the third leg of the triple bottom line, or profit, as I call it, people, planet, profit, the issue of infrastructure has to kind of bubble to the top. So in 2011 and 12, the World Economic Forum ranked India 89th out of 142 countries for infrastructure. So it's the single biggest hindrance for doing business. 65% of all goods and traffic flows in India through roads. And the roads, for those of you who've been there, know that they're in abysmal shape. Airports, the ports, all of these are in really bad shape. By 2030, there will be 68 cities in India boasting a population of more than 1 million. So that's urbanization at its best for you. But with that urbanization, there comes a lot of challenges in terms of trying to find jobs for these people, housing for these people, and how do you do those in sustainable ways? I mean, remains to be seen. So there's plenty of investment plans by the government and plenty of opportunities for public-private partnerships to improve the situation, but I guess time will tell what happens. And the last challenge I want to touch on is that of the corruption and the legal system in India. The legal system has been overhauled or is being overhauled, but it's still quite antiquated, and the bureaucracy and red tape is very, very well known. In 2012, India ranked 94th out of 176 countries in corruption per a study by the Transparency International, which actually studies all countries and corruption in all countries. And that's definitely not good news. And as of December 2008, some 120 out of 523 members of parliament in India had been accused of crimes. And that's a sobering statistic as well, which means that corruption and other kinds of ills are rampant in India's system. Some 65% of people polled confessed to having either taken a bribe or have received a bribe. And these conditions basically deter foreign direct investment. They deter companies from coming in and doing business. And unless the thing changes, it's going to be a challenge. So one thing that happened in India, which I think we should bring up, is that there was a companies bill that was passed in India earlier this year. And this companies bill, one of the clauses of this companies bill is the clause 135, which basically says that now large companies, defined by their turnover, which would be about 1,000 crores or $180 million, or those who make a profit of more than 1 million. So there are various ways of defining large companies. But large companies must spend 2% of their profit, on quote-unquote CSR, corporate social responsibility. Now, this is a mandate. Now, if they don't spend that money, they will need to explain why they haven't spent their money in a report to the government. And there are a variety of issues that are listed in this companies bill that companies can do to fulfill their CSR requirements. And these include things like eradication of poverty, things like improved sanitation, things like empowerment of women. So there seems to be plenty of opportunities. Now, going forward, it's estimated that $2 billion will flow into CSR via some 8,000 companies thanks to this companies bill. But the question I want to leave you with, and perhaps we can think about it or discuss it later, is whether corporate social responsibility can be mandated, and whether there are opportunities, whether this will be treated or taken up by companies as a way to do well and do good, or whether opportunities for gaming are going to persist, and therefore the sustainability challenges that we observe today will continue kind of in the years to come. So I'll stop here and pass it on to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CB. Yes. And could we now invite Dr. Ling to mention his stories about the sustainability of Asia by large, but China in particular? Please.
Good afternoon. I'm very honored to speak here. Asia faces a lot of challenge. This forum covered all those issues like climate change, WTO, innovation, middle income trap, macroeconomic stabilization, restructuring. You can name all of this. But what's the character of Asia? One character we all know is high population density. A huge portion of world population live in the Asia, 40%. And this factor itself means something. Negative things is if all those 40% of population got to the stage of high income country and want to live as the United States, the consumption level, that will be very dangerous for this work. We already know that. Mr. Larmi mentioned in their report. By our experience, in the last 30 years, we saw dramatic changes. Most fast changes is consumption pattern. From very earlier years, when we only wear the blue shirt, now you see very colorful the people wear. And they rush to Hong Kong to buy those luxury goods. And in Beijing, only 20 million of population, but have 7 million of cars. And it contributes 1/3 of the air pollution in Beijing. So could we change this? It's very hard. People want to drink Coca-Cola, want to drink Japan or German cars. So this is the most difficult things. Maybe we work together can show a good example and then make the people change their consumption pattern. This will be a very long-term issue. Let's take another, talk another short-term issue. Easier is investment in the human capital. Because we have 40% of the population live here, if we invest rightly on the people, we can see a big changes, especially for the earlier child development. Our foundation learned something from the United States and the international organization. We did baseline test, and we see the differences. In the city, the stunting rate for, of children under 5 is about 4%. It's closer to United States. In the rural area, in general, it's 9%. But in the poor area, stunting rate is 20%. This is the big gap. 20% means in those areas, we are close to South Africa. And we did another test. For the children living in the poor rural area, compared with the urban kids in the kindergarten, their memory is only 20%. And their cognition and other factors is only 60% to 80% compared with the urban kids. So those are very huge differences. But if we did not do anything for them, it will be expanded, the social gap. In the urban, now the family invests a lot in their children. They send them to best kindergarten. They save money and send them to abroad for the college education. But in the rural area, the parents and the grandpa live with them. The one day they speak just a few words. So in the rich family, every day the vocabulary they heard for kids is about 2,000. But in the rural, the vocabulary we heard is less than 200. That's a big difference and will create a big problem for the society. So we need to find a way. It's affordable, it's reachable with a high quality to invest in the poor area, the kids. CDRF did some work on this. We call the earlier child development in China. It's just like this logo, Asia Global Dialogue. It looks like looks like a brain. And the brain like this is if you give them a nutrition intervention and give them earlier care and education, you can change children's brain, make it stronger, make it balanced, and we're working on this. Last month, we hold a dialogue with Brookings Institute on earlier child development, and former Secretary Hillary Clinton and Vice Premier Liu Yandong attended, show both countries' leaders pay attention to this very important issue. I hope all Asia countries can make more efforts to invest in the earlier child development. That will be one of the key elements for sustainable development. I just stop here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Liu, for your insights with the shortcomings and problems. But before we have the last panel member to give the brief comments, I will give you a very important introduction for my old friend, Dr. Ling. Dr. Ling, he used to be my old friend, and I think the Chinese people are fully aware of him because he became the first director of the World Bank and opened the Chinese Peking office for the World Bank in 1985. In good 10 years from 1980 to 1990, he was the chief economist of the World Bank for China. And after his job in Beijing, he was successfully took the position as the World Bank director for Western Africa and India. In 1994, Dr. Ling left the World Bank and to lead the founding of China's #1 first international investment bank, that is CICC, and served as its first CEO. So, Dr. Ling, please have your points to our audience.
Thank you very much, Professor Liu. I would like to make an attempt to link the two subjects we've been talking about in this forum. One is obviously sustainable development, and specifically sustainable development in Asia, with the reform program that has come out of China, which we've been discussing at this plenary session, but also in a number of the breakout sessions. And I'll start by a quotation. But I've learned from Stan Fisher's experience, rather than rely on my iPhone, I print it out and bring it with me. Now, I'm not quoting from Keynes. I'm going to quote from Xi Jinping. And, well, somebody doesn't like it. But anyway, I'm going to quote from Xi Jinping, the new China's president and the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. And you all may have seen the decision that has come out of the third plenum, but many of you probably have not seen Mr. Xi's explanation of those decisions. It's a remarkable practice of China that the party would issue a decision, but the head of the party would then make a speech to explain the decision. And it's not a confidential document, it's a public document released. But let me quote from him, where he tried to explain why is China embarking on this extremely far-reaching but also extremely challenging reform program. And I quote here, "Reform is always necessary to solve China's real problem. It can be said that reform is our response to problem and is constantly deepened in the course of resolving the problem. Over the past 35 years, we have used reform to overcome the series of problems that have emerged in the work of the party and the country. At the same time, in the course of understanding the world and in transforming the world, all problems have been resolved, but new ones will emerge. The system must be continuously improved, and reform cannot succeed at once and cannot be accomplished once and forever." So that's Mr. Xi's explanation why he has led China into a very ambitious reform program. And if you read the decision, it is of course a very positive statement, which put in very specific, quite specific, the direction in which the country is going to move. But the decision also explained why the reform is necessary in all the important areas. And I think you know that this is the tradition that Mr. Xi was appointed the head of the party 1 year ago, and he took a year to study the situation, and a year later he came out with the decision. And this is, so he has studied the economy situation, and what has he concluded? Well, if you read the decision, you see that he has concluded that sustainable development in China is in a pretty disastrous state. And I think this is one aspect that this forum ought to remember, that whereas reform is a positive measure, it is coming out of a very negative assessment of the situation. Now, let me follow Mike Spence's definition of sustainable development. 3 areas. One is growth and development. The other one is environmental protection. And finally, social cohesion. That's a very good and very important definition of sustainable development. Okay, let's take growth first. I think now it's quite common to be talking about China new development strategy, the new growth pattern, which is based more on consumption and not anymore on export or investment. It also will be more equitable and more widely spread. Now, this is in fact nothing new. In China, about 13 years ago actually, in the year 2000, China launched its 10th five-year plan. And in that plan, it has identified the need for China to embark on a new development pattern of growth. It recognizes that the previous pattern of growth cannot be maintained as China seeks to transition from the middle income to high income to catch up with the advanced country. In those days, the buzzword of middle income trap has not been used yet, but the sense is the same. And then in the 11th five-year plan, which is 5 years later, the same objective was stated. In the 12th five-year plan, which came out a couple of years ago, the same objective was stated in an even stronger way. So what's happening after 12 years? Nothing. It's been really disappointing to Chinese leaders and economists how little the development pattern has changed. Investment is being, I think it's now over 50%. Saving is still extremely high. I think Mike Spence was quoting figures on household income, which remains one of the lowest in the world of any countries. And household consumption remains far below the world average. It's probably one of the worst, the lowest in any country. So obviously, the Chinese leaders' objective 12 years ago to change the development pattern has failed and is disappointing. Well, what about environmental protections? I don't think I need to say much about this. For those of us who go visit Beijing, I mean, there'll be a time in the morning when you wake up, you thought it was still in the middle of the night, but actually it was 12 o'clock noontime, but there's no light. In fact, 3 days ago, I was at Beijing and I saw the sun for the first time, and everybody was very happy. And I hear now Shanghai is now catching up with Beijing in some respect. But that's just the superficial thing. If you look at the intensity of use of natural resources in China, it is truly worrisome. Energy, natural resources, and land, of course. So in that respect, certainly the situation is very unsatisfactory. And then, what about social cohesion? After all, the previous leaders had set the harmonious society as their political objective. There are 2 aspects which, if you talk to any average Chinese today, and which is noted in the decision, which the Central Committee of the party has noted, 2 aspects. One is 不公, unjust. The society is unjust. And I think most Chinese are now used to the fact that in a market economy, you can't have equality of outcome. But at least you want equality of opportunity. And most important for us, all of us, we worry about our children. We want equality of opportunity, intergenerational. That's the one aspect that is now causing a great deal of social tensions. Not only that the system is unjust in terms of opportunity, but this lack of fairness is being passed on from one generation to another. And finally, corruptions. In fact, if a lot of Chinese media people are doing a word search on the decision, and obviously market has come out as the most used word. But if you search for fubai, you'll find also that many mention of fubai. Now, fubai in Chinese is actually a lot broader than corruptions. It includes corruption, of course, but it also includes abuse of power. It also includes rent-seeking. It includes all sorts of unacceptable behavior of public officials. And I think it's recognized today in China that corruption is one of the problems that will bring down the party and may bring down the country. So I think it's recognized that to deal with all of these problems, one cannot deal with only the symptoms. One must deal with the roots of the problem. I think Chinese has a phrase that 治标不治本. Now, catching the tigers and catching the fly in dealing with corruptions is only 治标. You are just dealing with the symptoms. In order to deal with corruptions, you must deal with the root of the problem. Now, I'd like to introduce this. All of you got this. I have nothing to do with PwC, but this actually, you should not throw this away like some of the documents here. It is a very good summary of the reform program. And I think the title is also quite appropriate. New Roadmap for Achieving the China Dream, which I think was distributed to everybody here. And it's a very good summary because it is a 20,000 word document in Chinese, and 20,000 words would translate to about 30, 40,000 words in English. So it's a long document, but this is a very useful summary. But I think as one of our Li Santong today in our sessions pointed, this one is easy to read, but because it's set out topic by topic, the reform measures. But it misses a key point of the reform. It's a system reform. She used the term matrix. Yeah, you have to, everything is connected, and you have to read it as a whole. You can't just look, some people, look, what does it say about foreign investment? Well, you can look at foreign investment section, but it's much more than that. And so the important thing is that it's a very impressive list of reform measures, but the sum is much greater than the part. And it really is a remarkable document and the remarkable plan to fundamentally change the way the Chinese economy functions. And for the first time in the Chinese Communist Party document, Mr. Lu Mai told me the word 治理 is used. It's not used at all previously. And even in the Chinese economic literature, it's used more in the micro sense, 公司治理, corporate governance. But in this document, in the decision, it's countries, 国家治理, 政府治理. Now that's a remarkable broad description. The governance of a country. What China wants to reform is the way China is, the governance of China is the governance of the Chinese government. And as I said earlier also, the intention is to deal with some of these problems in a very fundamental way. For example, if I think it's, you can have some development or analysis, but the belief behind is that changing the development model is not possible without changing the way the system works, the economic system works. As Mike put it in our session, in our breakout session, the 12 five-year plan defined the development objective of China over the coming 5 to 10 years. But the decision then defines how China is going to achieve this objective. because I think it's recognized that without the reform, those objectives cannot be achieved. And equally, how China is going to introduce environmental protection and how China is going to create a harmonious society and a social cohesion. So that's all I want to say on this. But I think all of us, companies and individuals, are probably getting a lot of missive from our corporate banker or private banker and say, how are we going to benefit from China reform program? And my advice to all of us is it's much too premature. It's a long process. I think the timetable being set by the leadership is the year 2020, 7 years. But I really think it's a 10 years program at least to have significant achievement, because that's the tenure of the leaders. And I guess perhaps before I move to India, I'll just say, if I could just paraphrase John F. Kennedy, ask not what the Chinese reform can do for you, ask what you can do for Chinese reform. And I mean it very seriously, because without the contribution of all of you in this room, the companies you run, you as an individual, China's reform is not going to be possible. It is an extremely challenging task that lies ahead. And you know, the Soviet and the Eastern European always thought that gradual reform is impossible, because in a semi-reform state, you have vested interest that would block further reform. And obviously, it's true in China today. You can see, I mean, Chinese reform has been enormously successful. But they have vested interest to deal with the enormous amount of obstacles, and it is an extremely difficult task that lies ahead. So let me move quickly now to India. I think there would probably be no disagreement in this room that India suffered from the same problem. Yeah, I think India was able to break out of the so-called Hindu rate of growth in the early 1990s when they initiated with the present Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, initiated the Indian reform program by abolishing the license Raj, essentially. And that led to a period of increasingly rapid growth. But we see now growth is faltering, and it's quite questionable whether high rapid growth can be maintained. Its problem is very serious in India. So unlike China, which is moving to a new development model, India needs rapid growth in order to reduce poverty, which is still very extensive, and it also needs rapid growth for the human development that it requires. On environmental protection, I think India is sort of similarly. And on corruptions, I think Mr. Bhattacharya has quoted us the figures, and I'm sure no one would disagree that corruption is a very serious problem in India as well. So I think we can say that both India and China are failing in their sustainable development. Now, India's political timetable is behind China. We will need another year before the new Indian leaders will be selected. And at that time, we can look forward to what the leaders will plan for India. But before ending this point on India, I would like to come back to another quote. And if I could steal from what Mr. Koch said to us yesterday. If you remember, he told us the remark of Mr. Ratan Tata that we can't build a road we need because we are a democracy. Now, I was 6 years the World Bank director for India, living in Delhi. Now, this remark of Ratan Tata is not a comment on Ratan Tata, who is one of the most impressive and visionary business leaders of the world. But it is something that one hears all the time. And I must say, Mr. Koch is very kind. I feel very sad when I hear this. But Indians senior level official, junior level official, central government, local government, come back on this point all the time, that they fail in something. When some achievement is disappointing, the response is, but we are a democracy. I think we all in this room, we feel that democracy is an asset to sustainable development. It should not be a liability, and certainly it should not be excused. And it is, in my memories of India, one of the saddest things that one hears so often, that we can't do this, we are failing this because we are a democracy. So let me then conclude by fast forwarding to 10 years from now. And with most of the Chinese leader and the Indian leader would have about a decade. And I think if Victor and Andrew were kind enough to invite us back here, my dream is to be able to stand in front of you 10 years from now and to say, China was able to achieve sustainable development because of the wise leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. I would like to be able to stand in front of you and also say to you, India was able to achieve sustainable development because of its democratic process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ling. And before we open to the floor, could I ask each of you one question very quickly? Let me start with CB. You got a lot of insights about the problems and the challenges. But in my eyes, the story behind your stories, I think I totally agree with you that the people are perhaps the most important factor in Asian sustainable development. So how do you view the challenges in that area? Because nowadays we heard a lot about the people resources, the human resources, including the education, the way of education, the difference between the education systems and so on and so forth, and also the different ways of employers managing their workforce and so on and so forth. Please.
Just like everything else, I guess there is no one-size-fits-all kind of an answer. And there are companies that have made tremendous strides in treating their employees well, treating their people well. But on the other hand, we keep hearing stories such as Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, where the workers wanted to leave when the fires started, but they were locked up and they were prevented from leaving. And then we hear stories about Apple's supply chain in China, where workers have to go through security checks in order to go to the bathroom, and when they come back. And obviously these are far from desired. And we have principles in place, so the United Nations, of course, is one organization that's been trying to do good in this regard. And the United Nations has this guiding principles for human rights, better known as the Ruggie principles, right? So respect, protect, and remedy. So you need to respect people, protect them from discrimination or harm, and then have access to remedy if harm has been done. But these principles, the Ruggie principles, have, I think, in some sense been a failure because they're just principles, and many corporations have not resorted to adopting them. So at a philosophical level, I think what we do need is a mindset shift, which we talked about quite a bit yesterday as well, in employers' minds that kind of, that your employee is no different from your child. I mean, and that's something that can be instilled over time, and we come back to education kind of there in that sense. And if we teach school children that, if you think about wanting the lowest price for your product, wanting the highest profit as an employer, and wanting the highest return from your investment, that is not a system in equilibrium. And if we can teach children to think holistically, then I think the day will come when workers will be treated, or employees will be treated better. But that's a long-term solution. I think in the short run, what is needed on the employee front is for employers to understand that employees, when treated well, they actually return the favor doubly. So employee loyalty goes up, employee productivity goes up, and there's research on this. And simple things like engaging employees in community volunteering activities, can make them more loyal to the company, can make them work harder on behalf of the company. And the feeling just goes to kind of an us versus them feeling that exists right now. So if we can at least tell employers that it's possible to do well by doing good and engaging employees in some corporate responsibility activities, that could certainly be a viable solution in the short run. And I think that's where public-private partnerships come in a very, very big way. There are many NGOs working on these kinds of issues. Right. And if corporations would only talk to them, or the NGOs would talk to the corporations and figure out a way forward, and then in 3 to 5 years' time, we can see a lot of difference. And you mentioned education, and the role of education in this is in the short run, again, for the workforce problems, I think companies need to step up and treat education as a business. I do not realize why they don't do that. So there are companies like Bosch. So I was teaching managers from Bosch last week in Berlin. And they have a huge operations in India, and they keep complaining about shortages of labor. Yeah. Said, so why don't you set up vocational schools? So the concept of vocational schools is absent in India, which is one of Germany's biggest success factors, is that everybody will not go to college, but rather they will get trained as a plumber, they will get trained as an electrician, as a contractor of sorts. But this sort of education is, in its infancy, at least in India. I know the context. And if we can encourage companies to treat education as a business and to train people who can then support them in their workforce efforts, I think we can go a long way towards sustainable development.
Yeah, I can't agree with more what you mentioned in education, the quality first. Yeah. You mentioned that many times, and I think it's very important. And, it's very controversial in Asia, because for quite a long time, people are talking about the quality of education. Do you think the degree requirement and the vocational school requirement are relevant to the jobs today and tomorrow in Asia? The degree requirements in the school, are they relevant to the jobs today and tomorrow?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think if you have a basic education, and after that from 9th or 10th grade on, you can certainly go in for vocational training. Yeah. And then choose what profession you want to be in. That's the order of the day. Everybody does not have to go to college. Sure. And we have many colleges in India, and many institutions giving MBAs. Several thousand institutions giving MBAs. But what they teach is is of very, very questionable value.
Thank you very much. And could I ask Dr. Lim, and I really appreciate you touch the root cause of a lot of problems in Asia and in China, in particular in India, because you are very close observers in the last 3 decades, and also now it's hopeful because from the top down, China, first of its time in history, to mention that we got to better our governance, its institutional arrangement. That's a change in the totality, and that will reshape the managerial skills in governing the whole world, whole China as well. So what is the most important issue in institutional arrangement towards China, big countries in transitional period like China and India? Could you talk about that? What is the most important portion in institutional arrangement, in governance, how to better our governance?
I guess sometimes it's common to use the term rule of law. It's broader than that. And so I would prefer to use the term rule-based governance.
Rule-based governance.
That people follow rules. Well, as I had quoted, this is wonderful. The Chinese, even political document, can have wonderful way of describing things. And in the section on the power of government official and party official, it says we must shine light on the power of officials. And their power must be put within a cage set by the rules. And you know, that's the problem, that it's a culture change in China, isn't it? You know, China is always 人治, ruled by men. But I think we are now in the 21st century, and the leaders of China recognize China must be to a rules by, not by law. Law is only part of the, you know, it has to be a rule-based governance. It includes regulations, would include law, but also include mode of behavior. You know, just the way, there are a lot of things we do that are simply, you know, we assume so. Well, like driving, you know. I mean, they're obviously highway code, but you know that you don't turn left without signaling, and you don't. There's certain rules of behavior, and that you expect to do, you know, and you expect government official to be subject to rules and regulation like everybody else. Whereas I think there's a certain period when, you know, everything is ruled by men and is subjective, and that's the source of corruption, isn't it? And in order to deal with corruption, you must limit the discretionary power of officials, but also apply rules to them as well as everybody else.
Yeah. The third plenum put a lot of focus upon that changes,
yes.
And we hope we will have a very sound and solid implementation since now. And could I quickly ask Lu Man, my friend, and the decision from the third plenum mentioned a very important topic you touched, that we got to be social inclusive enough, and because the disparity of income and the rights, access to education, and the many things, social welfare system are conspicuous in hinterland in China and the rural areas. So what is your points about the rural land reform this time? What's your view, 7 years or beyond, please?
Now, government mentioned collective construction land will have an equal right to enter the market like a public state-owned. So they account 15% of the agricultural land in rural area.
15, 1-5.
1-5.
Quite a lot.
So belong to the collective. They use for a factory, or they use a residence house. So if those land can transferred, can sell, it will increase the farmers' income.
Or use it as collaterals, and who can borrow the money to do some economic viable projects or something like private owned.
In last 30 years, equal distribute of the land contribute heavily in the rural area for income distribution in terms of assets, in terms of many important. But now it's come to the point to make some changes. Okay. Farmers need to increase their income, not only from agriculture, not only from the non-agriculture job, but also from their assets. That mainly is their land.
So it's very critical, very important, significant. But how do you view how fast we can make it happen?
They still need some experiment to show.
Experiment.
I think maybe 2 or 3 years we can see a clear
2 or 3
regulation
years.
on
Good.
this.
Okay, thank you. Now let's open the floor to you. And would you? We have questions. So please, can we have the mic?
We forgot about microphones.
Microphone. Okay. Mic. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Raju Kanore. I'm from India. And I would like to comment on what Mr. Lim has said about democracy and about leadership. And I think ultimately it's not a question of democracy or this different system of governance. I think it's all really about leadership. And I would love to see that the same kind of enlightened leadership which is there in China can be emulated in India, because as an Indian citizen, there is no way that I would like to lose my democracy in any manner. I mean, that kind of freedom, anything is worth democracy. So that's one comment I'd like to make. I think much has been discussed about India, that's why I'm actually commenting on this. And we have a lot of problems, there's no doubt about it. And I think, if I remember correctly, The Economist magazine in 2003 or 4 described India as a country full of subplots with no plot at all. And I think that kind of embodies a lot of the problems that we have. Nevertheless, I think there are a lot of initiatives which are happening, particularly on the education front. And whereas there may be a gap between the quantity and quality of education, I think there is a new scheme which is being led by Mr. Ramdurai, who used to be the head of Tata Consultancy Services. And he has been appointed as a minister in the government to lead the National Skills Program. And I happen to be a part of the board members of the National Skill Development Corporation. So I would like to add that there is a tremendous movement by the corporate sector who have actually adopted a large number of what they are called ITIs, which are not degree-oriented educational, but vocation-oriented, and they are matching the job opportunities with the skills that are required. So this entire skilling program by 2022 has a target of 500 million people, which means that we are actually talking about skilling the entire 22 million which are added to our job market every year. So this skilling program is actually, as Professor Bhattacharya mentioned, so I just like to add to that, that it's not that it's not being done, but it's a new program. Dignity is being imparted to the concept of vocational education. And I really think that India is moving. I mean, you know, a river originates from a mountain and ultimately flows into the sea, but it meanders its way through. And I think we'll ultimately reach the sea. But it may be that we take a longer time and a more difficult path, but the crux of the problem lies today in governance and leadership. And that's really where we need to really seriously introspect. And I hope that the new elections, which will be probably in April or May, would actually lead to a change in the manner in which the country will be governed in the future.
Thank you very much for your points. Very good points. Is there any other questions? Real questions? What's over there?
Hi, my name is Min, and I represent the Gus and Lum Group, and I must say we're very proud to sponsor this fantastic event. I have a question for the panel about sustainability and capital, and I think particularly for Dr. Lim. At GLG, we've worked, Professor Bhattacharya mentioned the UN, and at GLG, we've worked with the UN PRI, which is Principles for Responsible Investing. That initiative is a voluntary network for investors to sign up and hold sustainable principles within their investing mindset. But the question that is always asked is, do you have to sacrifice returns from an investor standpoint to get sustainability? So I'd like to ask the panel and Dr. Lim in particular, do you think that sustainability can coexist with striving for returns?
Yes, Dr. Ling. Would you like? Dr. Ling, could you?
I can offer my 2 cents worth. There is really no trade-off between sustainability and returns. The trade-off only comes in when you think of the time horizon. So sustainability takes time to pay off. I mean, you're not going to see the return in 3 months or 6 months. Maybe it's a year, 2 years, 5 years. The problem arises today that most companies are wedded to their quarterly returns and their forecasts, analyst forecasts, and expectations from Wall Street and so on and so forth. If companies can go against that tide and can look at the longer run and the returns in the longer run, then investments in sustainability invariably pay off. And there are two ways it pays off, basically. So the first way is I call it the direct route. So if you invest in kind of a better building, a greener building, then your energy costs are lower, and you're creating social value by conserving energy. But then there's an indirect route as well, which is how stakeholders react to the fact that you have an energy efficient building. And if your employees are happier and they work harder on your behalf, and they reward you with their loyalty, and your customers reward you with their loyalty because they're happy that you've created this kind of building, then you reap that reward as well. So the total return is the sum of this direct and this indirect return. But if you look at quarterly returns, you might not be able to see that. So there are companies like Unilever right now. So Paul Pullman, who's the CEO of Unilever, has actually said that he's not going to look at quarterly returns anymore, and they are going to work kind of for the longer run. If we have more and more companies like that, then I think the UNPRI, will indeed be a very, very successful initiative.
Dr. Ling, would you like to add some caveat?
My personal view would be that private firms should not be asked to accept low return for social purposes. That's the responsibility of public policies. The government should set an environment in which the private firm would maximize their return. Like climate change, it's not private firm responsibility to accept low return for the sake of climate change. It is public policies. There should be, for example, a carbon tax if that's the purpose of the government, of the objective of the government. Then the private firm can work within that environment. Now, of course, that's a rather simplistic and idealistic view. And obviously, in the real life, a firm can still act in a socially responsible way. But I must say, I don't buy into this idea that firms should accept low return for social purposes. I think that's the purpose of public policies.
Okay, is there any other question? We got one over there. Please.
Hello, Asif Siddiqui, Peking University, HSBC Business School, Center for Green Economy. So we talked about this new CSR clause that was recently passed in India. My question is, do you think it's likely to succeed, and how is it going to affect CSR practices in India? Thank you.
Sibing?
It had to come up, right?
Sibi first. Yeah.
So I'm not the answer is it depends. It depends on the implementation, which has been assigned to the IICA, the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. They're supposed to manage this whole business. Now, with 8,000 companies who are supposed to work on these different initiatives, I mean, you need large oversight to make sure that what work is being done. One of the big problems that I see right now is that there is nothing in the clause that talks about measures or measurement. How are we going to measure success, or how are we going to measure progress? And absent such measures, companies can game. I think there are plenty of gaming opportunities as of this point. If there are a set of measures that come up and say, okay, you need to kind of show us by this kind of form or some evidence-based that you've made progress on these fronts, then yes, I mean, I think it definitely has a lot of promise. So at this point, I would say kind of it's a double-edged sword. I mean, there's plenty of potential, but whether the potential is fulfilled or not depends on how well the clause is implemented.
Excuse me, we're running off the time, and to conclude, could I ask each of you a very brief question, and please simplify your stories in one sentence. And what is the top challenge towards the Asian sustainability, CB?
One sentence, okay. I would say that the top challenge is to make sustainability everybody's responsibility. So if we can make every citizen in every country think about environmental protection and think about social cohesion and have them accept it as their responsibility, then I think we'll have made progress.
Dr. Ling.
One word, reform.
Reform. Good word. And Lu Mai.
Investment in the human capital. But may I say something about India and China?
Yes, please.
Just a few
we are running
words.
out of time. Could you just...
Edward raised this question, comparison, India and China. We learned something from a school feeding program. India, through the Supreme Court word, the decision, so they now run the world's largest school feeding program. China, through the experiment in the local, now we run the number 3 worldwide, the school feeding program. So different approach, but the same goals. The question, the most important question is government should be accountable, should take responsibility to the society. It's no matter you vote for them or you choose by other institutional arrangement.
Thank you very much. And I think we have a very good discussions about the sustainability in Asia and China and India in particular. So through our discussions, we can see that the insights is like that. So long as we can move trade carefully along the paths that we can realize the spatial, social, inclusive, and environmental, the responsible. And in the meantime, we got to bear in mind, we got to lock up the bottom line in terms of risks from outside and inside, so we can achieve the sustainable growth. And that is a job from the government, and it is a job shared by the markets. Thank you very much. Would you like to join me to give a big hand over the panel member? Thank you for your questions.
Exactly.